Hello and welcome back to the Joyful Soul Creates. Charlotte here, and today I'm collaborating with Alicia from the Call Me Crafty Al YouTube channel for her Inspired Saturdays series. Here you can see the playlist of her series. She's collaborated with lots of talented YouTubers already, and there will be more coming in the coming weeks. The idea with the collaboration is that we each pick a project that the other one had previously made and then use that as inspiration for our projects for the videos. And I had a look on her Instagram to find inspiration, and there were a few cards that jumped out at me. Here you can see the ones I was considering, and eventually I decided I would take inspiration from this back to school card she made, where she coloured with brushstroke stamps to add the colour to the outline images. And Alicia does have a video on her channel showing how she made that, and I will link to that in the top right hand corner if you'd like to see that video in particular. I'm also going to be making multiples because Alicia so often does create multiple cards when she is creating, for example with her sheet load of cards. So I will be making 3 cards inspired by that back to school card I showed earlier. So I'm starting by cutting down my panels for stamping on, and I'm cutting these to 5 inches by 3 3/4 of an inch. So this will make them smaller than my A2 sized cards that I'm going to be working with later. And I was able to get 4 of these panels from my white cardstock. I was originally planning to make 4 cards, but I wanted to coordinate the card bases to the inks I was using, and I could not find the right shade of pink for a pink card base, so I skipped that and I'm only going to do the 3 after all. Once I'd chosen all my inks, I started on my stamping. So I've got the first panel in my MISTI and I've lined up the stamps I'm going to use. I'm using one of the flowers from Altenew's Wild Hibiscus stamp set. And then I also chose a sentiment from the Build a Flower Sakura Blossom stamp set. And I'm stamping those onto all 3 of my panels using Altenew's Jet Black ink. And then I'm going to start adding the brush stroke coloured elements to this. The stamp set I got the brush strokes from is a Love from Lizi stamp set called Smudges and Sentiments. I did have to clean up one of my panels because I'd got ink on the magnet, and when I put the magnet into place it got on the card base, so I went over that with my sand eraser and then started on the stamping. So I have a brush stroke that perfectly fits along the stem of the flowers, and I'm stamping that with Frayed leaf ink, and I'll do that on all 3 of them. And then I'm going to move on to adding colour to the flowers themselves using the largest brush stroke element from this stamp set. It doesn't cover the entire flower, but I kind of liked the way that looked. So I'm using Volcano Lake for the first panel. Then I'll clean the stamp off and just stamp it off a few times on some scratch paper to make sure it's fully clean. And then do the next one in blue, for which I used Ocean Waves ink. And I'll clean the stamp off again in between and bring in the last panel, and this time I'm using my purple, which is Lavender Fields. I did stamp the purple twice, and actually I think I should really have stamped the other ones twice as well, because this is quite a large solid stamp, so it didn't get the best coverage, but it worked well enough. I then did decide to restamp the flower over the top again with the jet black ink, just to make sure the lines were really nice and crisp. And this is the benefit of leaving the stamps in the MISTI, that you can very easily restamp them without messing anything up. I wanted to add some dimension to my images, so I decided to use a pencil and a blending stump just to add some shading around the petals of the flower. And I will also add a little on the stem as well. I'm not sure if I like the decision to do this though. In some places it kind of just looks like the ink has smudged. So I'm not sure if I maybe would have just been better off leaving it stamped how it was and not adding this extra detail. I'd be interested to know what you think of that. If I made them again, I probably wouldn't add this step. Whilst I'm doing this, don't forget as this is part of a collaboration, Alicia also has a video for you to watch where she makes a project inspired by one of my previous creations. I don't know what the project is she is being inspired by, so I will be watching her video to see that as well. But you can find a link to that in the top of my description box. You can also find a link to my accompanying blog post down there, as well as product links and links to all my social media and so on. Pretty much any information you might need should be down there, but of course if you have any questions, anything I haven't answered, you can leave those in the comments, and I'm always happy to chat with you there. Once I'd finished working on those floral panels, I did decide I wanted to add grey mats to each of my images because I noticed that Alicia's card had a grey mat. I didn't have any paper that seemed suitable though, so I decided I would make my own. I did also consider using peel-offs, but I didn't have any in a suitable colour, so I just found a large snippet of white paper and I'm going to turn it grey by using some Hero Arts ink and the direct paper technique, and I did also use a brush to blend it out a bit as well. I'll then use my cut align to help me trim narrow strips of this. I did start out with my paper trimmer, but I think the blade needs changing and it wasn't giving me a nice smooth cut, so I decided to use the cut align and my craft knife instead. And I think I confused myself early on because my first couple of strips were much narrower than my subsequent ones. And actually I would have preferred that narrower width because I think I end up covering too much of the card base in the end, but also the wider ones were easier to cut, so there's pros and cons to both. The cut line is rather simple to use. You just line up the lines on the ruler with the edge of the piece of paper or card that you want to cut, and then run the craft knife along the channel. As I was getting towards the end of the strip, it was getting a bit difficult to cut because it was narrower than the width of my ruler. So I just used some washi tape to hold it on another piece of card, just like a handle, and that made it easier to cut. When I had all the pieces cut down, I could start assembling the card. So I used Tombow Monomulti liquid glue, which is my go-to glue, to adhere the panel to the card base. And I'll do this with all three panels. I leave my Tombow in my Make It by Marko glue holder in between. I've talked about that before, and I'll link to the video in which I talked about that. I find that really helpful to keep my glue ready to go. Then when I had all three of the panels adhered down, I could start adding the grey strips. Rather than the Tombow, I did decide to use my Nuvo Smooth Precision glue pen, just because I felt that would be a bit less wet and less likely to buckle the paper because this is quite thin paper. And I used my Tim Holtz snips to trim the pieces down so that they were the right size. And I will actually go ahead and trim down enough to do the long sides on all three panels initially. And I do use my reverse tweezers to help me with picking these up because they're quite narrow. I'll do the long sides on all three cards first. And then when they are all done, I will come back in and measure and cut down the other strips I have to do the shorter sides. And I was planning on mitering the corners of these, but I realized the long strips weren't actually quite long enough because I hadn't perfectly measured them. So I decided not to do that because the mitering wasn't going to work properly and I just have them overlapped. Mitered corners would look neater, but I think this looks fine enough. And of course, if you have suitable grey card for making a mat anyway, then this isn't going to be a problem because you can just do that instead. Having finished adding all the strips to all the cards, I folded them, and then I am going to bring in a white gel pen just to go over the smudge that was still showing on the one panel, just to tidy that up a bit, and that will complete my trio of cards inspired by Alicia's video. Please do head over to Alicia's channel via the link below to see what she made inspired by me. I'm looking forward to seeing that myself. Thank you, Alicia, for having me as part of the collaboration, and I hope all of you watching enjoyed what I came up with. Thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing, sharing with your friends, shopping with my affiliate links, and supporting me on Patreon if you do. Your support really means a lot to me. There are a couple of other videos showing on screen if you'd like to see more from me right away. Otherwise, I'll thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video. Bye!